This is knowing the NAS, and Joe Can is going to be doing ground control. If you've seen the movie with Kiefer Sutherland called Ground Control, you may not need to watch this presentation because it's completely 100%. But anyways, here's Joe Can.
Never seen it.
Thanks, Kevin. Like Kevin said, my name is Joe Can. I'm the North Team Officer Down Manager for the Quality Control Group. I've worked ground control in Charlotte Tower. I've worked in a couple of other air traffic facilities as well. So the focus of today's conversation is going to be on ground control. First thing we're going to talk about is how the airport is divided up into different sections. Airports are generally divided into movement and non-movement areas. In the non-movement areas, those are not controlled by air traffic control. So most vehicles, catering trucks, and the airplanes that are moving around in those areas around the ramp space, which I'll have a visual depiction of here in a moment. Those airplanes are operating under rules, but they're not being told what to do by air traffic controllers. Neither are the vehicles when they're in the non-movement areas. They do have rules where they have to yield to aircraft that are moving, vehicles yield to them, but they're not talking to air traffic when they're in the non-movement areas. In the movement areas, on the airport surface, almost everyone in a movement area is going to be talking to ground control, one of the positions up in the air traffic control tower. That some or most of the larger hub airports, they have what's called ramp control, where aircraft are in what's considered ramp space, and they talk to ramp control to get pushed back off the gate and usually get moved to a spot in the ramp where they switch over to ground control, and ground control takes over from there. I'll have a picture of that in a moment also. So as I just said, ramp control is not a federal function. It's usually like at Atlanta, just as an example, Atlanta's a Delta hub. Delta is who employs ramp control at Atlanta Airport. I think they used to. Same thing when I was at Charlotte, US Air was their hub. US Air ran ramp control. Local control is another position that's in the tower that we're not going to talk about today very much, but a little bit. Basically, any aircraft that's within 5 miles of the airport, either on approach or on departure, or on the runway, is going to be talking to local control. So local control owns the airspace around the tower, usually a 5-mile ring. That's local control. And then all the airplanes that are on the runway, until they exit, they're on local control. So there are times when an airplane will be taxiing around the runway and needs to cross over, taxiing around the airport, and they need to cross over an active runway. So ground control will coordinate with local control for use of that piece of the runway so they can get the airplane across and over for whatever. There's a lot of reasons why they would need to cross an active runway. Usually it's to get lined up in the departure sequence because they've come from another side of the airport. They need to cross over and get in a line, which we'll talk more about sequencing in a few minutes. There's also another position in the tower I'm just going to touch on briefly called clearance delivery. Basically, they get the airplanes the right route that the airplane will fly to wherever their destination is. So there's a reroute in effect for New York area airports, which happens a lot in the summertime for the weather. Clearance delivery will get in touch with the pilots while they're still at the gate, and they'll reissue their route that usually they change it from what they thought they were going to fly. They reissue them a new route. And that all rolls into the sequencing part, which is a major responsibility of ground control. That's just a very brief touch on the other positions. I can do a presentation for, well, not clearance delivery, but I could certainly do a presentation about local. But we're just going to talk about ground control. If anybody has any questions as I'm going along, feel free to ask them, or you can hold them till the end. So this is a whole bunch of bullet points about ground control. Basically, the crux of all this is ground control's responsibility is to get your airplane from either the gate or the edge of the ramp airspace to the edge of the runway, where you talk to local and then you get airborne and go on your way. Or when you land and exit the runway, ground control's responsibility is to get you from the edge of the runway back to the ramp or the gate so you can get off your airplane. They do that in a wide assortment of ways to give the pilots all kinds of instruction. Pilots probably get more instruction when they're talking to ground control than any other time in their phase of flight. Their ground control gives a lot of varied instructions, and it's not usually like a canned clearance that they're normally used to hearing. They get, that if a pilot is not familiar with an airport, they can request something that's called progressive taxi instructions, where the ground controller will give them step-by-step instructions: taxiway Alpha, turn right on Bravo, continue on to Kilo, turn left. That would be an example of a progressive clearance, whereas a more standardized clearance would be taxi to the gate via Alpha and Bravo, hold short of runway 36 left. And then we'll get more into what hold short of the runway means, and I have a more graphic depictions of that. But all the communication from ground control is, like I said, that the main function is to keep the airplane and the vehicles that are in the movement areas away from one another as best as they can. They do a lot of sequencing, which is a vital part of that. And what I mean by sequencing is, if I'll just use Atlanta again. Atlanta has a departure, a bunch of airplanes getting ready to depart, and 5 of them are going to New York, and 2 are going to Dallas, and 3 are going to Los Angeles. You don't want to put the 5 going to New York all in one row, and then the ones going to Dallas, and then the ones going to Los Angeles. You want to spread them out so that local can just keep launching them when they have right at the minimum separation. And then the departure controller can get them on course more quickly if he doesn't have to, or she doesn't have to space them out or fan them out, because they're all going, everybody comes out on a route. So the New York ones want to turn northeast, the Los Angeles ones want to turn west, southwest for Dallas. So if you can fan them out off the runway for departure, it just makes everything a lot smoother once they get in the air. If ground control, for whatever reason, doesn't do that, then usually the sequence will back up on the taxiways, because for New York, locals probably got to give departure 3 minutes. One going to LaGuardia can leave, and then you can't launch another LaGuardia for 3 minutes. But he may have been able to get one off going to Dallas right behind the New York one, and then get the second New York one off. But now they missed a gap, and it backs everything up, especially at a busier airport like Atlanta. It's real easy. Well, Atlanta's not the best example to use because they have a lot of taxiways and it's more of a modern layout. Kennedy is a better example where things can get backed up very quickly because it's older. The taxiways are not laid out in the best way for maximizing their efficiency, and they have no way of fixing it really because it's up against the water and it is the way it is. So ground control, local control, they need to really be in sync with what they're doing. The airplanes need to depart, they need to arrive, and everything needs to be spaced so that they can get out and in the maximum amount of airplanes as they can. Yes, ma'am.
For an airport like Atlanta, the size of Atlanta or Dallas, do you have several ground people working ground
Yes.
control?
You would have, well, in Atlanta, I believe they have 4 locals and 4 grounds. Now, that doesn't mean they always have all those positions open. They probably are working with 2 locals, 1 for each side of the runway, maybe 3, and then 2 or 3 grounds. So the airports are usually divided up somehow in half, where the north side is ground control north and the south side ground control south or west or east, depending on the configuration of the airport. Thank you. And the locals would be, you would be standing in the normal tower configuration. Local control will be standing on the outside so they have maximum view of the runways. And then ground control, their ground controller stands next to them. So they can listen to what locals doing while they're trying to set up their sequence. Big part of ground control is being in tune with what local control is doing. So this is, since I've been a controller, every time I meet someone somewhere, this is what they think I do. This is not, I've never done this. I'm not minimizing what this man is doing. But this is not air traffic control. This is some kind of ramp control. And he's important, and I'm not saying he's not, but he's not doing ground control. This is more along the lines of what ground control is.
Can we get the lights?
Yes. So this top picture here, this is JFK at night. You can see there's a lot of lights, and it's a challenge to pick out the right ones that are moving when they call you on the frequency. This is also another airport, I believe it's Dusseldorf. It's just getting dark, and you can see they have very similar issues. They have different equipment than we have. I'm not exactly sure what all that, especially this thing is here in the middle. But I was just using it as an example of what the ground control looks at when they're looking out the window at night. It makes it challenging. So here's an example of these airplanes are both taxiing to the runway. So this airplane would have been told, hold short of Lima, give way to the British Airways, follow the British Airways taxi to runway 365. So the pilots then would look and say, okay, we're looking for a heavy Airbus Speedbird. And they would find the one, see if there's more than one, the ground control would need to specify. Follow the third heavy Speedbird, follow taxi runway 365 feet kilo. So this is an example of a sequence where the ground controller has lined these up, and hopefully, like I had stated earlier, they're going different places. If not, then the local controller is going to have to space them out as he gives the required separation to the TRACON controller. And if the local controller doesn't do it for whatever reason, because towers can get, they only have a finite amount of space on the ground. So there are going to be times when local's just going to say, I know these guys are all going to LaGuardia and I'm supposed to give 3 minutes, but I'm giving a minute and a half because I have to. And then the departure controller will spread them out to give the center the required intra separation that they have to give.
Question.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit, having been there, like Atlanta, where we have two sides of the airport, two locals, how one side will take, let's say, north and west departure gates, the other side will take the south and the east. They're not sending them 4 different directions off each side of the airport.
That's correct. So the way the ramp space is lined up and the way that the ramp at Atlanta is lined up is that all the departures that are going to the north or the east, you're going to board the airplane in that area, and then you're going to taxi out of the ramp space and go to a spot along the taxiways where you'll taxi to the right runway. That happens probably 95% of the time. There are instances where airplanes will need a longer runway, like that heavy Speedbird is going to need the longest runway that Atlanta has to get airborne and get to London on it. It's full of people, it's full of gas, it's full of bags, so it needs the longest runway, and they may park on the wrong side. So rather than make them taxi all the way around the airport to get airborne, they'll taxi them to the closest runway, and then they have to coordinate with the other local to get the other local to stop their traffic. They'll launch, or they'll release the Speedbird, prepare for takeoff, and then he'll turn across the other local's airspace, and then the other local can start launching their traffic again. But most ramps and most airports are designed so that you wind up on the right side and you're on the right runway, so that stopping doesn't need to occur. Yes?
Yeah, and that's very important for the when you're talking about the communication between the locals, because we think of a tower down here that you've got locals standing on opposite sides of the tower, but we have airports where there's actually different towers with different groups operating different sides. They got to make a call rather than just look across and ask the guy.
Right. I think that Dallas may be one example that has separate towers, but I'm not positive.
They are.
Okay. So here's another example of a sequence. You can see these airplanes are all from the same company, which would be similar to what would happen at Atlanta. You'd have 9 or 10 Deltas, and then an American, and maybe 3 Southwests somewhere sprinkled in there, but the majority of them are Deltas. The nice thing about that is that 90-something% of the Delta pilots know what the drill is at Atlanta. They know they got to exit, they know where to go, they have a general idea of how things work at Atlanta. Whereas Southwest, that might be their first time into Atlanta, so they would need more attention from everyone in the control tower. But again, this was just another example or a picture of a sequence No, I believe they already did a signage, runway markings, one of these TED Talks already. So I'm not going to get too much into that. We'll go into the whole short one here in a moment. So this is a depiction of a smaller tower. It's Dayton, Ohio. And the yellow is showing all the responsibility that ground control would have. So this part here would be the non-movement area. Airplanes would come off the ramp, and they would end up at one of these spots along the ramp space before the taxiway starts, and that's when they would call ground control. And ground control would issue them taxi instructions to the runway. You know, that if this runway was active, they would tell them to hold short, they'd get clearance to cross, and then, let's say this was the departure runway, they would taxi him here and tell him to hold short and switch him to local at the hold short line over there. Or they could switch him to local earlier than that, but generally it's somewhere near the end of the sequence, whatever's going on with the sequence there. So this is the same thing. With the blue is what local control would have control of on the airport surface. So they would be scanning the runways when your airplane calls 5 miles out, Southwest 2020, clear to land runway 36 left, and while they're giving that clearance, they would be scanning to make sure the runway was clear. Or they would be scanning to make sure they had enough room with the arrival that you're following and your airplane, or any other, that they would be making sure that the runway was not going to be occupied when your airplane was getting ready to touch down. So here's a good airport diagram of a very small airport in West Virginia. The lighter gray in here, this is all ground control movement areas. And at this airport, they don't have ramp control. So ground control would take responsibility for anyone pushing back from a gate, but it's not busy, so this frequency is not going to get overwhelmed by aircraft requesting to push. And there's only one runway, so there's no crossing of the runway, except maybe if an aircraft was over in this area or over here for some reason. JFK. You see there's many, many more taxiways that the ground control has responsibility for. There's a lot more non-movement areas. There's a lot more runways.
How does ANSI come into play, or how does control?
We're going to get to that. It's okay. It's a big part of ground control. ASDE stands for Airport Surface Detection Equipment, and we're going to get to that very soon. So this is an overhead view again of, I believe it's Dayton. So this gives a good indication of airplanes stop here and wait to talk to ground. They make a mess, they wait, and then they go. This would be an example of hold short lines here and here. And you can see that the taxiways have yellow lines so that the airplanes know, okay, I'm on a taxiway, whereas the runways have dashed white lines. So it gives the pilot another indication that they're in the right place when they're taxiing. Along with the other signage and the ground controller watching to make sure, okay, I told you to go out Lima, you went straight across, and now you're about to go on the, you're in the wrong spot. Which does happen occasionally, but it's not a normal occurrence. Okay, so this video is going to show what the pilots see, and in the background, it's not the greatest audio, but you can hear the ground controller continually talking to all the airplanes that are on their frequency, giving hold short instructions, giving airplanes taxi instructions, and you can watch what the pilots see as they're taxiing, and they respond back and forth with the controller. And it's not that long, but it's.
Echo, left on 4 left and a left turn on now, so I'm over the bridge for now. Last Eagle, Hotel Echo, 4 across the left out to 1862. Echo 503, when you guys make the right down to Echo, we'll show the taxiway Bravo to do with that stuff coming off the Cap 26.
That would be on short of Bravo.
Got it, support the 26, I think, occupied, and go to,
Coming off that way.
46, taxi, go. Taxi 4322, what gate you in on? 4326.
Oh, that right there.
Okay, yeah. 4326.
So they're going to stop before the hold short, they're going to stop before those lines.
That's left on opposite. As you said, you went to American Airways and along and what's it going to occupy you? The 0.3747. 0.3747, the 32 right there. 32 right there.
Watch this now. He's the one that missed the whole top. He's off. Cool. Happy that you're on Virgin. Come on, Virgin. Get it together.
The last clearance from ground control there was the way to the Virgin and the contact ramp. So they were already stopping for the Virgin because they saw him coming and they didn't know what, they hadn't been told what was happening. So they were waiting for ground control to give them instructions near the end. But that was, you were able to see a little bit, the video's a little bit bouncy, so it's hard to pick out everything. So this is another video, and this is a good example of what can happen when a ground controller loses the picture, or they don't know where a few airplanes are that are calling them, and it can get interesting quickly.
JetBlue 707, you're on. Oh, you're the guy who came out of there. Okay, JetBlue 707, give way to your company off your right, then Echo to Bravo, short of Victor. Echo Bravo, short of Victor, we'll get ready to company JetBlue 707. JetBlue 176, if you can't get in, let me know. All right, we'll check. Thank you very much. John, good evening, yes, Officer Joy. The hotel short of Alpha. Hotel short of Alpha was who? Aircraft 011 Heavy, where are you? 1010. You coming out or you going in? Coming out, is that 111 Heavy? Ground it in. Now, guys, that airplane 7 Heavy? Airplane 011 Heavy, ready to push? Airplane 011 Heavy. If you want to push in the alleyway, that's call your ramp for that. Okay, something right now, well, Heavy? Ground United States. Is there Canada going to get off the whiskey or do you want us to go on now? Hey, those two JetBlues, can you guys get by Iberia or not yet? JetBlue 35, what's the problem? What do you want to follow? You're on Bravo, you're short of Victor Alpha, you're being the Iberian? The female Italian on the left there. Female Italian. Alright, just hang on. JetBlue 179? Yes, there were number 2 holding short of Victor Alpha on Bravo. Hey, who's the first JetBlue on Bravo short of Victor Alpha? 35. You're an outbound? Yep. Hey, you guys should come up here one day. JetBlue 35, need you to pull it right up there and hold short of Victor for me. No, that's, you must be behind somebody behind. We're right at Victor, 35. Okay, you're at Victor. JetBlue 179, you're a BB Altair? Yeah, 144, Iberia, short of Victor Alpha. Alright, JetBlue 179, somebody stepped on you. You're the first one there to be my Iberia? No, sir, we're number 2. You're the first one? And the first one is JetBlue 144. We're be my Iberia, short of Victor Alpha. JetBlue 144, you an inbound or an outbound? Inbound. I told you to go where you are? Exactly. I did, okay, so, go down to Victor. You guys should come up here one day, you'd enjoy it, you'd enjoy the show. Go straight ahead and hold short of Victor, I can't do anything else with you. What's your numbers again? JetBlue 144, we totally understand you, as you can, I'm sure we'll go up short of Victor now, JetBlue 144. Yeah, I'm going to move your company in a second in front of you. Once he clears, come up 13 left and hold short of whiskey. Yeah, come up 13 left and hold short of whiskey, all right? Okay, I understand. Simple 144. Behind company, we'll go on 1 left, short of whiskey. Yeah, back on the runway, short of whiskey. Now I'll tell you, 611 Heavy, make the left turn on the uniform and go around the horn. Follow the leader. Roger, I got a 611, well, that's going to get it all up with her. JetBlue 35, power out, Italian. Oh, thank you, now. JetBlue 35, just to make sure you're Bravo sure to make the lane.
Okay, so that was a depiction of what can happen. It was many years ago, Kennedy, probably 10. And it was before they had ASDI, like Angela was talking about. So we'll get to ASDI in a moment, but this is the setup that he was probably using these flight progress strips to keep track of the aircraft, which they do still use if ASDI breaks. So he obviously, something happened with his strips. They fell down, they got out of order somehow, and he was trying his best to get the airplanes back in some kind of a sequence so he could get them moved around the airport. A simple thing like that could lead to an hour-long delay while they try to figure out who's where. And yes?
Does the ASDI show like the alpha characters out beside it to identify the planes, or
Yes.
just the icons of the plane?
Most of the new ones definitely show the full data block with the call sign. Here's a depiction of ASDI. You see this is the airport layout. You know, the lighter gray ones are the ground control's responsibility, and it shows where they're going, the call sign, and none of this stuff is probably actually on there, but if it is, I don't know what good it does. But because it doesn't matter how fast the airplane's taxiing on the ground to anyone, really. And this is an ASDI replay when it's dark out. This is JFK. So you can see, had this system been in use, it would have been a little bit easier for him to figure out who was where, and probably he wouldn't have gotten in that situation in the first place. But I'm sure it still does happen even with ASDI. This is a very short clip of what ASDI looks like at Atlanta when it's in motion. There's no sound. It's just, this is what ASDI looks like. And you can see that the call signs are connected to the airplanes as they're taxiing. The crookeder lines are all the taxiways. The straight lines are, oops, sorry. The straighter lines are the runways. These are the runways down here. And that's what ASDI would look like to the controller, the ground controller.
What is it?
A call sign, that's what the airplane's name is. So every flight has a different name, and that's how the pilots would communicate back and forth with the pilots in the tower.
DAL, is that like a certain airline?
Yeah, DAL is Delta, and then it's followed by 2 or 4 numbers.
Is that the same as the flight number that's printed out on, for example, your boarding pass?
Usually yes, but not. Sometimes they change it for air traffic reasons. They may have a Delta 2127 that got delayed in Honolulu, and it's now still en route, and you're on Delta 2127 leaving Atlanta. So they'll change it in the system for air traffic so that the flight plans don't cancel each other out, or a controller in Atlanta sees there's a Delta going to Houston and they take the flight plan out. So they try to not have duplicate flight plans in the system at the same time, or duplicate call signs, I should say.
What common equipment, FAA common equipment, are the pilots talking this week?
That's just the regular airground radios, I believe. I'm not sure. I know they can use the PET 2000 in an emergency, but generally it's just the ground control frequencies that are in the tower. But I don't know.
Can you repeat the question and answer?
What was the question, Joe? We didn't hear the question.
The question was what comm equipment is ground control using to communicate with the aircraft? And I said I don't really know the name of the comm equipment. It's just the air-to-ground radio frequency that ground's assigned to, but I don't know any more details than that. I'm sure it has a name, but I don't know what it is.
RTR.
It's called RC, but they're connected to the RTR, so they're radios, of course.
Are you talking about
XCOM radios?
I'm just like RTR, RCL, I just know a bunch of those acronyms, but I was just wondering which.
Even among the radios that are in an RTR facility, there's frequencies that are designated for ground control and local control inside one of those facilities.
Right, and usually most towers, the local controls, the frequencies are the same, and the ground control frequencies are the same, so that local can just say contact ground as the airplane exits the runway, because I'm sure you've all landed in airplanes before. It's noisy in there, and to try to be giving them instructions as they're trying to brake and exit with the flaps or whatever it is that's making all that air rushing sound that the airplanes make.
Yeah, it should be noted in the cockpit too, they're usually two radios, and they'll have the ground control already set there while they're talking to the local. And when they say contact local, they just flip the switch because they've already preset that frequency on the other radio.
You said those ramp controllers are typically like, in Atlanta, it'd be Delta employees. Do they own their own comm infrastructure for the ramp control frequencies?
I believe, yes. I'm pretty sure that they own the infrastructure is either owned by the airport or.
It's not mixed in with FAA radios.
No. No, they keep the ramp control separate. Does anyone else have any questions?
Is there only one as the antenna on top of the tower, or are there multiple around the?
Can you say the question again for him, Joe? 'Cause I don't think they can hear that.
Is there more than one as the antenna on top of the tower, or is it just one? I know when I worked at Charlotte, there was this white spinning thing that made the tower rotate, and there was only one of them. So, I don't know, are there two now?
There's two at Atlanta.
In Atlanta.
Okay, there's two at Atlanta, so I guess that it matters how new the system is maybe, or how busy the airport is. Or how-
You also have multiple sensors all around the airport, and some even off airport, to pick up all of that outlying traffic as soon as send it back.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends what obstructions are in the way and the infrastructure of the airport, what it can see. So we call those remote units. And then we have the main nest.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay. Thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Excuse me, we're gonna send you all a survey, after each course or each, workshop. We try to send out a survey just to get feedback.